And U.S. President Donald Trump's executive order against South Africa will have far-reaching consequences for U.S.-South Africa relations. The unprecedented decision marks a significant downturn in diplomatic ties between the two nations, according to the South African Chamber of Commerce in the United States. It expressed concern over the implications of the executive actions, particularly its potential to accelerate a significant exodus of skilled professionals from South Africa. For more on this, we're now joined by U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us virtually from New York. Sherwin, does executive orders hold an immediate and unalterable effect, or is this something that Senate and Congress can have as an item for it to discuss and decide upon?
Forget about Senate and Congress, Oliver. The courts are stepping in, and there have been a number of executive orders so far that have been suspended by the courts. So Donald Trump has been signing a plethora of orders since, his inauguration on the 20th of January. And many of those, while being implemented immediately, right, he does have executive authority, almost equivalent to a law being passed by Congress, but also then subject, as congressional laws would be, to the Constitution and judicial intervention. Yeah, and what you're seeing from the court so far, there could be about 3 or 4 executive orders. For example, gutting the staff at USAID. Courts have also weighed in on Donald Trump's executive order suspending birthright citizenship in the United States. Essentially, if you're born here, you become a U.S. citizen. His executive order sought to undercut that element of the U.S. Constitution and has therefore been barred. An injunction has been instituted by a federal judge in the United States. But of course, this is a legal process that will continue all the way up. Donald Trump certainly hopes to the Supreme Court, where he's appointed a number of conservative-leaning judges, where conservatism has a sort of a 6-3 slant on the court. So this is a process that is likely to play out in the courts, as we are seeing early iterations of that already. So to your question, yes, these EOs, these executive orders can be reviewed and will be tested against the Constitution of the United States. And of course, we have not seen, to the degree to which you certainly point out, the intervention here by the United States Congress. As you well know, Republicans now control the House of Representatives. They control the majority in the Senate, and they are recalcitrant. They are reluctant to take on this president, given his vast popularity within Republican circles and the implications that could have on their future viability come the election that, in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years from now.
Perhaps to take it to this part of the executive order that really struck my attention, and that is Donald Trump drawing some sort of a link, however mythical it may be, between South Africa implementing expropriation acts, or as Americans would call it, eminent domain on the one hand, and America's national security. Those two things don't seem immediately linked. Is there any link at all? And have you heard some expression on this from the Secretary of State, who's meant to oversee many of these contentions?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Oliver, right? Is there a direct link between South Africa's domestic land expropriation laws and, U.S. national security? And the easy answer is obviously not. And what the South African ambassador, Ibrahim, has told me in conversation is that they're using land expropriation, with or without compensation, as a pretext for their broader disagreements around South Africa's foreign policy positions. That seems to be the thinking. And we see other examples like that. I talked to you earlier about the fentanyl example as it pertains to imposing tariffs on Canada. Fentanyl coming across the northern border, the border between Canada and the United States, only represents less than 1% of all fentanyl entering the U.S. So the question then is, what was the pretext really? What is behind Donald Trump's imposition of tariffs on Canada, which have subsequently been suspended? But it surely cannot be the less than 1% of fentanyl coming across the border, despite him saying that. So there are questions as to what the real cause here is. But we can also read this executive order, right? It talks about South Africa's aggressive positions towards the United States and its allies, including Israel, who's just been in Washington, D.C. the past week. The ICC indicted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They've imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court vis-a-vis the decision to seek arrest warrants for Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And they also talk about South Africa reinvigorating relations with Iran to develop commercial, military, and nuclear arrangements. So land expropriation is the stepping stone for a broader disposition towards South Africa by the United States, based, one believes, certainly based on the executive order, based on South Africa's foreign policy positions, in the main taking on Israel at the International Court of Justice.
Donald Trump is yet to appoint an ambassador of the USA to South Africa. Given his disposition over the last couple of weeks about South Africa, do you assume that is still a priority of his? Will there be an appointment at all? Or is the South African mission, the US mission to South Africa, something that he doesn't think worth resourcing?
Well, I think American and South African businesses, right? There is a free trade agreement known as the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which comes in for renewal in September this year. South Africa is seeking to retain its preferential status in that. Given the executive order and given the posture you are seeing from the United States, that is becoming less and less of a reality in terms of South Africa remaining in there, just given the executive order we are seeing here. Yes, it would seem most likely that he would appoint a South African ambassador, a U.S. ambassador to South Africa. He appointed Lana Marks during his first term, someone that was born in South Africa and has subsequently lived and moved and become a U.S. citizen here. So one expects him to do that. The question is who that person is going to be and whether they then become an enforcer of the disposition we are seeing from the United States. Will this be someone that wants to foster a strategic relationship with South Africa, or will this be someone that is there to, in a sense, harass the South African foreign policy positions, their domestic policy positions? There are some names being bandied around. We reflected that in our reporting earlier this week. I'm not going to mention his name here, but certainly there are names in the fray, but we will wait for confirmation of who that person might be. And then don't forget, Oliver, when an ambassador is nominated, the country, the source, the country that person is going to, in this case, South Africa, would then have to acquiesce to that nomination. They give the go-ahead as a yes or a no. And the question is, will South Africa say yes or no? Were that person to be visibly against South Africa's own national interests? It's certainly a diplomatic dance here that we will be watching very closely.
Yeah, if it's the name you and I are both thinking about, I see an uphill battle in getting that name approved by the South African DIRCO office. Thank you so much for that update. Really do appreciate it. Sherwin Bryce-Pease coming to us from New York.